you're someone who has a bit of experience with training and movement, but you're going through a period of inconsistency with your practice, where you feel like life is just too hectic and busy to move as much as you want, then you're going to want to stick around. And look, if you're honest with yourself right now, you're probably like most people where you just think you're busy and stressed when actually you waste a lot of time. Even though you're busy, you probably find yourself doom scrolling or watching too much TV. All those things we probably know we shouldn't be doing, but then we make up some silly excuse about not having enough time to practice or do other things like meditation, stuff we know is actually going to be good for us. Here's the thing. I feel for you because I was there not too long ago where I felt like I was just fighting an uphill battle against all these bad habits I'd created for myself, and I just felt like I was wasting my life. Now, if you have absolutely no idea who I am, my name is Ronan Loons. I'm a movement teacher. I help people who have been training for years but still feel stiff, stuck, and uncoordinated finally unlock freedom of movement in their body. I've got loads of students working with me online and in person in my movement school in Bray. I've helped people like Ollie here who had been training for years, and he's even a coach himself, but when we started working together, he was really struggling to train and practice because of his shoulder and his knee. Within 12 weeks, we managed to get rid of his shoulder and knee pain and got him back to going full tilt in his training again after holding himself back for so long. He made such a significant change with his shoulder, he said he probably would have been able to avoid shoulder surgery had he started working with me sooner. He was another person that was really struggling to find the time to practice and train because the injury was leading to inconsistency and he was losing the spark for training because he couldn't push himself. We all go through it at some point, and I did too. At one point in time though, I was running my own gym and teaching small group personal training classes almost every day on top of all the day-to-day operational tasks that go with running a gym. The gym was doing great, loads of classes and happy members, but the workload was having a pretty bad impact on my quality of life. I was even working with an online coach at the time because I felt like I was too busy to handle my own programming, so I outsourced it to someone else. Now, it's not that working with a coach was a bad thing, it's just I hadn't really got to the root cause of the problem. I was still inconsistent with my practice, missing sessions on a weekly basis, pushing things off to tomorrow, and even cutting sessions short and leaving the gym early some of the days because I had to get work done. This was going on for months and it was really eating away at me. I felt shit because I wasn't really training properly. I was missing weeks of training at a certain point because I was telling myself there just aren't enough hours in the day. I was really beginning to resent the situation I found myself in. The whole idea of running my own gym was to not only help others achieve their health and movement goals, but to provide a level of freedom and flexibility in my own life that allowed me to grow and evolve as well. And not to pull any punches with myself, I was regressing. I'm in a much different situation right now. Right now, there is way more pressure on my time and availability than there was when I was running the gym. Am I perfect with the use of my time? No, that's not the point. I'm not here to preach that my system for managing my time is the best thing out there. Instead, I want to share what I feel is the real nugget, the real essence of what allowed me to drastically change my view on how I was managing and thinking about time, because that's what really allowed me to make such a huge change. Now, let me go back to where I was and the way I was thinking about time to help give you a bit of context as to the situation I was in, what my day looked like, and how I was viewing my time. So I was running a small group personal training facility in Clonskeagh in Dublin. We had pretty much built up the place to run about 35 classes per week, 6 days per week. You know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday being the busy days, kind of filler days on Tuesday and Thursday, and then Saturday classes as well. And I was pretty much doing that all by myself for probably a 6 month to 9 month period. And then we eventually brought someone in to take off some of the pressure, build the facility, make it a better experience, because it was definitely taking a toll on me in terms of the amount of hours I was doing, all the stuff that I was doing. Because even outside of that, there was probably about 5 to 10 hours of administrative stuff. You know, coaching itself can be quite labor intensive. You're managing people, managing relationships, all that sort of stuff that's happening while you're obviously delivering a high quality service as well. You're doing split shifts where you're waking up quite early to get in for 6 a.m. classes. You're kind of doing a few bits and bobs throughout the day. You've maybe a little bit of time to go and do maybe your own stuff, like, random responsibilities like going to the gym, making sure I got my shopping done, all those sort of in-between bits you'd kind of get done during the day, because then you wouldn't really have the evenings because you'd have to come back in for classes and do those. So the idea was that my time would be very limited in the sense that I had to obviously be there for the classes themselves, and then I had to be somewhat regimented with the in-between bits, making sure that I got those responsibilities, those normal lifestyle stuff done, and then obviously any admin stuff with the gym as well, making sure that, we were following up with people that were inquiring about the gym, making sure that there was programming done for everyone, keeping the place clean and tidy, simple things like that. Now, the problem was I felt like I didn't have enough time to train. I would tell myself I didn't have enough time to prep meals. I was feeling rushed with a lot of my work. I wasn't able to really plan and prepare long term. And I could only really manage kind of like short-term preparation, because it always felt like you were kind of spinning too many plates to a degree. I'd never really got anything systemized. Everything kind of felt rushed in a way. And I would always kind of point to the fact that like, oh, I have to go and get this done and that done in between. And I was being terrible with the organization of my time in a way. Now, with that attitude and the way I was letting work take over to that degree, I felt like shit. I was missing weeks of training. I was too busy to do anything, in my own words. Now, solving the problem was somewhat obvious. The gym was obviously doing very well for that extended period of kind of, up to 6 to 9 months. And it just made sense to obviously bring on a new staff member and train them up and make sure that they're delivering a high quality service to the degree that I was. And at a certain point, that meant that I could give them more classes, and then I would take some of the stress away from myself. And I thought that was great. I was delighted. It was a case of like building the gym and really putting my stamp on things. I thought everything's going to be great because it would really give me a little bit more time to systemize things, to get my own shit together, that kind of way. Like I could finally get back into training. I could finally prepare meals again. I would have enough of a buffer and not so much my time being given away in a sense. But, and it's a big but, I was still wasting my time outside of work. Even when I brought in the staff member, it meant that I was on my phone scrolling Instagram, staying up late watching Netflix, all that kind of stuff. Really faffing around with my time is the easiest way to put it, and I was doing that when there was a lot of pressure, but I was justifying it then, saying like, oh, I'm too wiped, I'm too, I'm too drained. I can't keep up that level of effort without having something where I could just almost like shut my brain off. And yes, there needs to be time for those things. Obviously, we can't be 100% go, go, go all the time. But even clawing back some of my time, I then let that stuff just kind of spread itself more into the free time or the extra time that I had now carved away from myself. And in a way, that meant that I wasn't really learning. I wasn't really growing. I wasn't really evolving. And when I think of those things, like that was my justification for really pursuing this career, to really have an impact on other people while also, figuring things out for myself. There's a certain point where you realize that like your progression is vital in order to help people see certain things, make certain jumps, certain leaps in revelations, to be able to point and guide because you've been through it yourself. You actually have like, proof of concept, proof in the pudding, in the sense that you've gotten to a certain place and you're able to help people navigate. You're not going to get there without having been there yourself. It's the idea of like not being healthy, not being able to do certain things and somehow trying to teach that to other people. It's just it comes across as fake. It doesn't come across as real, because you're potentially parroting someone else. You haven't really gone through the experience and been able to point to it and say, this is what you have to be mindful of. This is what you actually have to focus on in order to get to the next step. And the reason why I point to all this is because this was kind of the turning point. Like I can think about it in terms of just thinking like I was fed up, something needed to change. I was at a real low point. I felt terrible in both body and mind. I felt reactive. I felt stressed, anxious, all those negative emotions that really boil and bubble to the surface when you're going through periods like this. And I think in a way, not enough people point to these situations. Like that feeling of enough was enough is pivotal. You hear it in a lot of people where you just get to that point where things have to change. And I know for a lot of people, they maybe point to those intensive periods as seemingly, you might point to others going through those periods and think that it seems a bit too intense. It seems a bit too black and white in a way, but sometimes that's what's needed to really get yourself away from a situation isn't good for yourself. I really had to sit with myself for a while and really analyze what was going on, because it had become such a contrast to where I wanted to go with my life, the way in which I wanted to feel. It just felt so bad that really like focused me in on the problem. I was completely unconscious to something that was going on that had kind of slowly taken over my life. And it was just like, I need to get out of this. I need to really analyze this. I need to focus in on the trajectory out of here, because what's happening right now isn't working. So this was what really led me to probe a little bit deeper into my relationship with time, because that's where what kept really coming up. Like that moment of analysis, feeling like enough was enough, led me to look at certain things in my life, and time, my use of time. I could start to see a little bit more clearly where I was wasting it on activities that weren't really good for me, that weren't helping me grow, that weren't helping me evolve. So with that, I just kept asking questions about time, really trying to unearth what was really going on. And I felt at the time like I was really boxed in. This is how I really felt with time, really my whole life. I've always felt boxed in by the idea of a rigid schedule, having to plan things out and stick to something that concrete. It always felt as if like, where's the spontaneity, where's the moments for creativity, for not for laziness, but you know what I mean, for that feeling of like being able to relax, being able to just take a step back and not be so focused on one particular thing, and just setting myself away from other people, all those kind of things that maybe go counter to a rigid defined plan. And we all feel this way maybe when it's other people's time that we're on. We're doing work that we don't want to do. We're in school and it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to be here. That's kind of the attitude that we take to it, because it's suddenly from school into potentially college, into work, all those sort of things. And it's like, oh, I'm on someone else's schedule. I don't want to get up that time, but I have to because of work. And I could see for myself that it really stemmed from how I was viewing time when I was in school. Those were they're such formative years. They're what teach you a relationship with time. You have a schedule in school and you have classes that you need to go to, and sometimes you're navigating around the school for the first time when you're in secondary school, let's say, and there's suddenly that pressure of you need to be here by this time and you need to get these certain things done by this time, and you've got these tests here and you've got to prepare for the end of the year, and you've got to make sure that there's a bit of a plan. And it teaches you that skill, obviously, but there's a resistance to it. And that's how I felt, because my attitude in a way was I got away with a lot of things. Like I was able to push things off to the last minute. I didn't do terribly in school. I was definitely above average in terms of my results from school and in terms of what I did. And it felt like I was able to get away with that because I didn't have to push myself hard to be able to get the results that I was getting by kind of pushing things off last minute and, cramming, all those sort of tactics that go with that. So I got away with it. And I didn't really realize that habit had stayed with me, through college, right into when I owned the gym. I've always felt like I naturally just wasn't the type of person that could stick to a schedule, but when you look at it, that's really just a lie that I was telling myself. Clearly I could stick to a schedule because I was able to show up for classes. I've been able to show up for appointments my whole life. Like when I think about it, I'm really, really good at that. Like I have an experience when I was younger where I would sort of naturally just want to show up on time and make sure that I was there. I didn't like being late, but I would have this happen to me every now and then, where my dad would offer to give me a lift. And my dad has always had a big issue with his sleep. He has sleep apnea, so sometimes he would just wake up and it would take him ages to wake up because he would just feel so groggy. So it would be that kind of thing where he would say to me the night before, be like, oh, like I'm not in work until later on in the afternoon, so I'll wake up and I'll drop you to school. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. Like school was only ever a 15-20 minute walk. My dad was going to drop me, cool, whatever. I'd wake up the next morning and it would be the kind of thing where I knew we had to leave by, let's say, I knew we had to leave by 8:20, but he would still be in bed, and I'd go up and I'd be like, Dad, like wake up, I need to go to school. You said you were going to drop me to school, and like if I leave now, I'm going to be late regardless, but if we get in the car, maybe we'll get there on time, that kind of thing. And it'd be the kind of thing where he'd snooze in, and I'd show up late for school and I'd get in trouble. And I hated getting in trouble. So it'd be the kind of thing where it really ingrained in me when I was young. Whether my dad intended to do that or not is to be seen, but I have to imagine it wasn't really that he wasn't intending to do that. But it's made me develop a relationship with showing up for appointments. Like, I'm ridiculous to the point that, like, I'll show up 10 to 15 minutes early, like, at a bare minimum. Like, I'll factor in time so much better to be like, okay, I need to be there by this time, so I have to give myself a buffer, which means I have to kind of leave at this time, and I'll always kind of have a buffer there. So I end up kind of showing up for things sometimes like half an hour early, but in a way, I was seeing that in terms of the appointments and the schedule, because it's like, yeah, cool, this is someone else that I've agreed to show up at this time, whatever. But it then kind of didn't filter out into my things. It didn't filter out into the things that I wanted to do. So in a strange way, I always developed this kind of relationship with time where I was like, oh, I'm doing this for other people. I'm doing this because I have a responsibility on me to be there for someone that I said I would be there for, that kind of way. So work was always fine in terms of showing up on time. But then the actual work that was like my responsibility, I would kind of faff, I would kind of wait the last minute and then kind of stressfully get it done as quick as I could right before like a deadline. And then when I think back, like, I tried using a calendar, time blocking for a while, all those different tactics, but I was resisting things. When I think about it, something would inevitably get in the way, and my meticulous plans would, for the whole week, I'd have everything kind of meticulously planned out, like hour by hour, my food planned, when I would cook, and when I would wake up, when I would go and brush my teeth and shower, all that sort of stuff. Like, that was all meticulously planned out. And then something would obviously get in the way life just inevitably doesn't go as planned. Like, that has to be accounted for, but I wasn't really accounting for that. I was thinking that, like, oh, if I just plan everything to the T, everything is going to work, and I'm going to do that. And I wouldn't even get a week in, I'd get a few days in. Obviously, as I said, life just does itself. And I'd take that as evidence as, cool, this doesn't work. Time blocking, keeping a calendar, sticking to a plan, all that stuff doesn't work because life just gets in the way. This is impossible. And it seems kind of silly when you say it like that, but that's really the way a lot of people consider their attitude towards time. They do maybe one or two different things, and they create these limiting beliefs. And I had a limiting belief about time. I really needed to address it, like, because these limiting beliefs, these opinions about certain things that don't really align with what you want out of life, they often create your reality. They become the underpinning, the thing that holds you back in certain areas, because you either choose to avoid it, you become unconscious of it in a way. You just take that as, that's me, and it's unchangeable. And those are the things where we really evolve, we really grow, because only when we go and address them do we realize that they were such a constraint, they were such a stopping point, that really, as a result of taking it away, it's suddenly like the floodgates are open and you're able to go and expand into a new space, a new area, because you've got rid of that limiting belief, that constraint on whatever aspect of your life it's there. So I was really telling myself that I was, bad with time management. Clearly wasn't true with the amount of hours that I was doing in terms of the 35 classes that I was doing, the bits of admin and everything like that. Like, clearly I was able to manage my time. The way I was viewing it was, I was, managing my time as something I would almost do for other people, something I just did because I had to. That big shift in my perspective, shift in my thinking about time, that really allowed for the change to happen, was because of the terrible place that I found myself in. I realized I had been wasting my own time for years, and I was underachieving because of it. It was leading me to deliver poor quality work. I was getting things done last minute. I always felt rushed. I felt stressed as a result. So to a degree, I wasn't really, living up to my potential, in the sense that I could do these things. Like, as I said, I got away with things in school, and that leaves you with that sense of, like, I could have done better. Like, I could have got a better grade. I could have done more if I had just prepared a little bit more. But I would still take that attitude into the next thing. Once again, pushing it off, doing it last minute, not really putting a level of quality time into it. And in a way, I've started to realize that, like, that isn't necessarily a bad thing in terms of letting things ruminate. And I've kind of seen it as, like, that's my way of being creative, kind of like letting something simmer, letting my unconscious take something, being able to tie things together in a different way outside of, say, the actual idea of writing it down. But I still needed to schedule that time. I still needed to set that time. And that's what the way in which I manage my time now is, even though I might not be feeling creative, let's say, I still need to make sure that, like, this is my creative time. This is the time I have time blocked away. I've set this as my creative time to get those things done. Even though it may be a big struggle, like it's almost like a wrestling match, because you're resisting it, you don't want to do it, but you still need to do something for that time. And I feel like that kind of gives you the opportunity, when you're then not working, when you're doing something else, for the unconscious to kind of sit with something, because you've mapped out, even though you've been struggling, you've mapped out something, you've got something down on paper, whether it's the ideas or something. Then that gives your brain the space to kind of maneuver things about. And then when you come back to it, it's like, oh, now I'm able to approach things in a certain way. Because how I was maybe viewing time before was, if I'm not doing the exact thing that I need to get done at that moment that it's scheduled, then it's a waste of time. I'm not utilizing my time really well. So it would lead me to kind of task hop. I'd go from thing to thing, because it's like, oh, I'll just get this done instead, because I'm not feeling the creative energy, the creative flow. When really it's like, no, like, you have this time set aside for the thing. Like, get whatever you can done in terms of that thing itself. Step away from it when you need to step away from it, if that's all you feel like you've got done for that thing itself. But still, like, sit with it for that time. Make sure you go at it. Like, if you need to take 5 minutes to come back to it, like, that 5 minutes is going to be huge, where it's just like, go and step outside, walk around, like, don't do anything, just be bored for like 5 minutes. And when you come back to it, it's like, okay, now things are working. But it's so easy to sit with that thing for a short amount of time, say, okay, nothing's working, and then fuck off and do nothing, but then not come back to it, and not be able to actually, you don't have a lattice work, you don't have a things written down, and you're expecting yourself to just kind of like, oh, I'll push this off, I'll push this off, I'll push this off. And then when you come back to it, it's a whole mess, because you are kind of, yes, you're doing things in a more motivated state. It's last minute, so there's cortisol running through your body. So yes, you're able to kind of to get things done, but it's definitely not as fleshed out, not as structured as it could have been. When you have written things down, when you've got at least something down on paper, to then allow the unconscious to navigate through it, to sit with it, to go through it in that way. So those kind of realizations only really happened when I changed how I was viewing time, in that, I started seeing it as mine. I really had to start seeing it as something that I was optimizing for me and what I wanted. What are the things that I want to do? What is the direction that I want to go with things? Not just letting the work or the thing itself take hold and go in the direction that it was going. Like, that's really how I felt with the gym itself. Like, although I really enjoyed working with the people that I was working with, and the place that I found myself in, and I was grateful for the opportunity, there was a certain point where I recognized that this is kind of growing legs on its own by just being a gym, taking on people, and going in the direction that it was going. When really I had the opportunity to kind of mold it a little bit better in terms of the way I wanted it to be. Not necessarily just like, this is a business, so it has to take on people, and it has to go things in this certain way, and it has to do these certain things because that's the standard, that's the way things need to go. It's the way the industry works, it's what fitness looks like, that sort of thing. When really it was like, if I had really been able to kind of sit with it at that time, like, I've learned the mistake now, obviously that's where I am now in terms of what I'm doing. But at the time it was a case of, I'm just doing those things because it's expected of me, rather than being able to take a step back and realize, like, okay, this is understandable why things go this way, but that's not necessarily what I want. So if I had that in a way, that's how I now view my time management, is I have to look at it from that point of, like, what are the things that I want to do in terms of the way that I want to go with it. Those are the things I'm going to optimize for. It leads you to this realization in the sense that, the things that you want to work towards, you recognize that they're going to be hard. You recognize that they need to be planned out, and they're going to actually be hard to execute on. But you only see that challenge and want to take that leap, want to take that step, when you get to that point where you're just fed up, when you feel like you've said, like, enough is enough, like, there's enough although it seems quite strange, you know, it's a really negative space that you're in, but it's enough negative emotion and negative energy to really spark the change, because you're just fed up. You're like, no, this is not what I want anymore. Like, even though I know this is going to be harder, you know, this is something that I don't want. It's going to be somewhat like it's going to be equally hard, but why like weigh up the two hard? Like, why take the hard that you don't want? Take the hard that you do want. It meant that I had to really drop that label of I'm not good with time management. When I did that, you know, it gave some space. It helped me recognize in a way that time management is just a skill, and you can learn a skill like that. It seems simple, but that's not how I was viewing it beforehand. I was viewing it as something that was kind of fixed. That was either you are good at time management or you're not. Like, it's funny when you realize those kind of fixed mindset opinions that you have about certain things, those limiting beliefs. You just think that, like, no, that's the way certain people are, and I'm not one of those people. When really you have to recognize that there's a possibility for growth. You know, that idea of a growth mindset. You have to recognize that, like, this is a skill, and anyone can learn a skill. You may be just not great at the skill right now compared to maybe where other people are from starting out, but that doesn't mean that you can't progress in the skill that you're trying to develop. So it was a huge part, but it seems almost trivial to a degree, but those are the moments of like a real shift, a real turning point. Those moments of recognizing the negative space that you're in, the motivational energy that comes as a result of it. You know, I've talked in the past about this idea of having an anti-goal, like an anti-vision, and a vision. You know, we all think of the ideal, we think of the vision. It's like, oh yeah, great, I want this for my life, and I want that. But like, what do you not want? And when you've been to that place, whether it's in sort of a very small area of your life, like where I was with that, recognizing that like I wasn't managing my time well, and it was a real big constraint on things, and it was leading to a lot of my problems. That's where you get, I feel anyway, you get that kind of like, okay, now this needs to get done. This needs to be resolved now, and it's no longer an issue. It's not staying an issue. So this shift helped me start thinking about things as more of a system rather than just something that was static. As I said, we all have those things that knock us off track. Life is just what it is, and it's not as if they're not there anymore. But the way in which I was changing my mindset around it was, these are just data points. Like, if I'm really looking at this as a system, it's something where there's all the data points that get put into it, in the sense that it's like, cool, it's all the inflow of things. In terms of the actual, like, I plan out on a certain day, I execute on the plan itself. The day is the day. And you obviously you adjust on the fly sometimes as a result. But then I was giving myself a review process, being able to say like, oh yeah, okay, like this is what I planned out. This is the way actually things went. And rather than it being like, cool, this doesn't work, fuck it, and just flipping the table and being like, bye-bye, see you later, it was then realizing like, okay, the things didn't go as planned, and that's fine. They never will. But now they're data points. They're things to account for the next time that you go and plan. And sometimes you recognize that like, oh, something that seemed as if it was only happening every now and then is actually something that is consistently happening. So now it's up to you to be able to take in the data, to recognize that like, okay, there's an area, there's a certain thing that needs to be adjusted. And then now that's the micro problem that we need to resolve and to adjust for the next week, so that it doesn't continue to be a problem. It's a simple task, but you know, sitting down, running through a list of questions to help assess the previous week is such a huge thing. You know, we all think of that as a great thing of like, we all know that we need to like have some form of plan. We have maybe things in our mind, but we don't really write them down a lot of the time. And then suddenly we get to the end of the week and we're like, I got nothing done that I should have actually done. That idea of then having some form of assessment at the end of the week gives you that opportunity to not only have written down, say like 2 or 3 big things that you should have got done, But to then review and say, okay, did I execute on things the way I was supposed to? Where did I maybe go wrong in terms of my week? What were some of the time sinks? All those different things. When you run through that, you suddenly start to realize like, oh, certain things are just reoccurring. I'm maybe loosely planning certain things when I need to be a little bit more ingrained. I need to give a bit of a buffer here. This isn't going the way it should be going. And then that's going to refine itself. It's going to refine itself. It's going to refine itself. And over weeks and weeks and months, you then get to the point that you're like, oh, okay, this is just habitual now. I know how many things that I can realistically get done in the week. I know realistically what my time kind of looks like. I know roughly where some of the time sinks are, the things that I have to be aware of. And then when you find yourself maybe like falling short on one of those areas, whether or not it's something often comes up. You help out a friend, you mind their dog or something like that, or you house sit or whatever it is, and then suddenly you're like, oh, like this has such a huge knock on into the quality of work that you're able to get done, the way that you manage your time. Simple things, and you then see it as like, oh no, I need to go back to the optimized version, the really efficient way of looking at things, because it starts to grow. You start to like, not only I'm obviously thinking about this in the sense of work, but what is work for you? Is work in terms of working for someone else, or isn't working on something that gives you life? This idea of a movement practice is really about the switch towards seeing things from a more developmental point of view, looking at it as a process of self-development, like seeing it as, how do I learn to handle situations better? How do I be calm in certain situations? How do I really fine-tune my senses to be able to see the vast richness that is life? Like, those are the things that you really should be developing, because they help you see life in a different way. They help you understand things from a different perspective, rather than this kind of frantic, reactionary living that a lot of us unfortunately go through. So when that's the thing that you're optimizing for, you start to, that becomes the juice, the squeeze, the thing that you really want to push towards. And you start to see those other things as, I don't want to say toxic, but you understand where I'm coming from. It's like you start to see certain things as like the doom scrolling, the wasting time, the doing things that aren't really good for me. You start to see those as like almost more, you start to see a better picture of them. You start to really see the impact that they have when you have that contrast. When you start optimizing for the other side of things, you start to see a different side of the spectrum. Things open up to the point that you're like, oh, this is really a lot bigger, or is having way more of an impact than I maybe realized before. Whereas this thing over here is actually giving me so much. There's so much there's so much life force being had from the other side of the things. And when you really do those things well, like when you're practicing regularly, when you're eating well, when you're meditating, when you're doing all of these things, when you're involved in a community, having good relationships with the people around you, like those things are actually giving you so much, and you're having such a much more rich experience, when you see that side, and when you actually optimize for those things. And that, in a way, comes from this system, like being able to plan out your week, having kind of simple things that you're going to say, okay, this is what I need to execute on, and learning and going through that process. For me, it was seeing it more of a system, and seeing that process grow and evolve from there. So in a way, this seems simple, right? Just plan out your week, everything's going to be great. But in practice, not often the way. The way to think of it is, the system points you in the right direction, like time blocking, doing a calendar, setting all these things out. Like, you still have to do the work. That's the simple way to put it. The difficulty really comes when you don't have your priorities straight. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but you've got to think about it from that aspect of, this is what, when you don't have those priorities straight, it's like, that's what really leads you to fob things off, to push things to the side, because you haven't really got your priorities straight. Like, you have to recognize that when you decide to do something, let's say for example, it's like you should be going to practice, or you should be doing those things, but you fob it off. The thing that you have to recognize is that you're saying, this is my number one priority right now at this moment in time. So whatever you're doing right now, like watching this video, you obviously have something, like maybe you do have some free time. And if you do, happy days. But whatever you're set, like whatever you're doing right now, this is your priority. That's what you're saying by the fact that you're dedicating time to it. So this is the recognition that a lot of people have to have, is that when you're going through things that you know you shouldn't be doing, that's something you should become conscious of. Like, that's the problem for a lot of people, is that recognition of, oh yeah, I'm just doing this now because I need a bit of a break. But then suddenly it's like, how much of your time is really dedicated towards those kind of things, like those things that you know you shouldn't be doing, when really you should be doing something else. And in a way, we also project into the future. You see this a lot of the time, or at least I do when I'm chatting to people who are maybe going through these periods of inconsistency with their practice. And, as I said, I say this with the caveat of, I know there are people out there with a lot of experience that have been maybe training for a good extended period of time and have made lots of progress. They would consider themselves more of an intermediate and advanced practitioner, or someone with a lot of experience. There's still those moments of like days being fobbed off, weeks being fobbed off. And we often take it as, the way I'm feeling right now is how I'm going to feel next week. And sometimes, as I said, for an extended period, that might happen, by all means. But we often project, and we project almost incorrectly. We take that energy that was maybe the stressful energy from one week, and we bring it into the next, when really it's not relevant. And it leads us to kind of go like, oh yeah, I'll push it off. But it's like, no, like when are you going to get it done? Like there's time somewhere to be able to fit it in. So it's that idea of having your priorities straight, understanding like right now there's something that you're prioritizing that like as a result, you have to understand there's a ranking system going on in your own brain, and whether you're conscious of it or not, certain things are probably up there in terms of your priorities that you don't really want to be there, when really you're saying like, no, this is a priority of mine, when it's like how you're actually handling your schedule, what you're doing with your time, will show that that's not the case. It's not actually a priority. Another way to kind of think of this, another thing that might help then, is to consider there's this thing. It's a post that I saw someone say about Alan Watts, basically, that the way in which he would think about time or his actions was not allowing a thought to thread the needle, in that a thought comes up, this idea of I'm going to do something right now, and you want to reduce that time between saying you're going to do something and actually taking the action, because that's like threading the needle, like something threads its way in there and just goes, oh no, we should do this instead because that's fine, we can get that done maybe another time. Don't let a thought thread the needle. If something comes up where it's like, I need to go and practice, maybe that's part of the system, that's part of your schedule, it's part of your routine. You're like, oh yes, now I need to go and do the thing that I would say I was going to do. Like previous Ronan said I was going to go to the gym, he scheduled it out and said, this is what I have to go and do. You have to stop that threading of the needle, that thought that comes in and goes, oh yeah, but we could go and do this for a few minutes just because, like that's all it is. It's a just because we could. It's like, that's the free will side of things. It's the agency. It's like, oh yeah, I don't have to stick to the schedule. I could just go and do this one thing for a few minutes and whatever. You have to cut that threading the needle has to go. You have to reduce the time between saying you're going to do something and actually taking the action. And that idea of having a system, having a schedule, understanding your priorities, like you take those things seriously, and that's where you start to realize like, oh, this is what makes things challenging. Like this is the battle of day-to-day living. It's not just scheduling it out. We all go through those issues of like planning something out and just only planning, and then it's like, oh shit, now I have to do. Like now's the hard part, and that's where understanding it as a system, having the priorities, as I said there, and that idea of like not letting the thought in, just being like, no, we said we would do the thing, do the thing. So in a way, it's very interesting when you consider it from this side, because it means that there's a level of consciousness that we have to develop. We have to be vigilant. We have to be observant to what we're doing, or else you'll get distracted. Like the battle for our attention is out there in terms of the many things that are trying to pull us. Maybe you saw this video, you saw the thumbnail, and I've made it look really attractive because it's like, oh, I'm going to discuss this topic, and Yes, it could be the thing that just like changes your perspective on something and just makes you go, no, I should probably take time a little bit more seriously now. Like hopefully it does. But for a lot of people, I know it's a case of, unfortunately, even though I'm putting these things out there and I want them to help, I know for a lot of people, when you see things on social media, it's a distraction. It is sometimes like, yes, if it's your free time, happy days. If you're happy with that, we should all have our free time and we should all be able to spend our free time the way we want. But unfortunately, it's the case for a lot of people with the majority of things on social media is there's such a warp. There's such a rabbit hole to go down. It's like, oh, this video looks great. And suddenly there's 30 minutes gone when it's like, your schedule said you should have done something else. So I point to this as an interesting thing because if you have set aside the time to maybe go and do something, like let's say for argument's sake, you've got some free time in the evening and that's when you go and watch this video. Perfect. If that's the case, happy days. Or that's when you watch Netflix. Cool. Happy days. You schedule the time. And that's how I schedule things. I have certain points where I'm just like, cool, nothing scheduled. I can actually go and have some free time now. That's really the way we should be doing it because it at least means that like there's a reward somewhere. Like it's that little bit of a like, oh, okay, the stress is off because I know I've got all my things done or whatever it is. And that's really the better way to think of it rather than letting those things come in and distract us because suddenly a week goes by and we haven't really done anything. For a lot of us, unfortunately, that's the case. So all of this perspective on time, this way of managing things, this system that I actually have, this is all part of the work that I do with my students. As I said, there was a certain point where I kind of had the gym as the focal point, and there were certain things that a gym really sets in terms of the things that you can do, the things that you can teach, the way in which people want to receive the service, you know. So I've changed that. I've changed the way in which I deliver things to people and how this material is really seen with my students. Like that's the relationship I have. Is this is a process of education, of learning, of growing, you know. So it's one aspect of the work that I do. I've kind of divided these things into 4 key pillars. This is part of something called the conscious body. So it's one of the 4 foundational pillars. That's the way I've really divided it up. And the program as a whole is the emphasis really is to help you move with more freedom and confidence, and finally feel more connected to your body in more ways than one. This exact pillar is all about reaching deeper levels of awareness in both body and mind so you can be less distracted, where each experience in life becomes richer, more meaningful. That richness and meaning for me didn't necessarily come from the system I adopted. It came from the shift I made about how I was viewing my time and how I was wasting it. To help crystallize all of this, I want you to think of it as a process of rectification. This is something I learned from my teacher, Marcello Palazzo. The idea with rectification is it's a process of putting something right. It actually comes from the word rectus in Latin, which means straight. It's the idea that when you set your sights on something, you're at point A here and you want to get to point B. So instead of going like this, where you're kind of in a roundabout way, like fobbing about, meandering, doing various things, you're going straight for the point. You know, it's the straight line. How do I rectify things? How do I make sure that I carve out the clearest path to point B? And that's what I execute on. And this meandering, this kind of going back and forth, like I feel like that's where most people are in how they approach a lot of the things that they do. You know, yes, they have the plan, but then when it comes to actually rectifying, executing things, they're meandering, they're wasting time, they're doing various things, we're being pulled in various different directions. When really we have this kind of this level of wholeness that we develop in ourselves, understanding things like this is where the conscious body comes into things. It's understanding like how do I make sure that I execute on the thing that I'm supposed to execute on? How do I rectify? How do I get there as quickly as I can? Not necessarily in terms of like just speed, but in the most efficient way possible. How do I get to that thing that I'm trying to get to? How do I execute on a plan with like precision, accuracy, all those various things? So the idea is you make your path clear, your intentions clear, your goals clear. Like this really makes you aware of the things you're doing that are not really aiding you in your pursuits. You know, it then becomes your job to rectify, to put things straight, to harmonize everything around you and pursue what is meaningful to you. This is what we're really doing with the conscious body and how it fits into the picture of the Movement Practice Foundations program as a whole. If you want to find out more about the program, then you can check the link in the description. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page. For now, I wish you the best in your pursuits into the depths of your relationship with time, and I'll see you on the next one.